Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. I came home early that day. It was one of those rare afternoons when I'd finished work ahead of schedule and thought I'd surprise Emily. Maybe bring her some takeout, watch a movie, and make up for the last few weeks. I'd been buried in the business, running on fumes, but today I wanted to make things right. I should have seen the signs. But when you're in the middle of it, you always think it's just a rough patch, right? You never assume you're walking into a nightmare. As soon as I opened the front door, something hit me, a weird mix of sweat, cheap perfume, and laughter. Not the usual sweet laughter I remembered from our early years. No, this was something different, something wrong. My heart thudded in my chest, but I didn't slow down. I made my way toward the living room, that unsettling feeling growing heavier with each step. And there she was, Emily. My wife of 15 years, sprawled out on the couch, but she wasn't alone. No, her legs were wrapped around some guy I recognized from her gym. A personal trainer, young, muscular, that cocky smirk plastered on his face as he pulled her closer. For a second, I just stood there, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. My brain couldn't quite catch up with the scene in front of me. It didn't make sense. This was our home, our living room. How the hell was this happening right here, in the place we'd built together? Emily looked over her shoulder and noticed me. Instead of shock, instead of guilt, she smiled. Not a nervous smile or a please don't hate me kind of smile. No, this was a grin of pure satisfaction. You were never enough for me, she said, her voice dripping with venom. And then she laughed. I felt like I'd been kicked in the gut. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I didn't know whether to scream or punch something. Every nerve in my body was on fire, but I stayed silent. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, the nails digging into my palms as I watched the two of them act like I wasn't even there. The trainer, what was his name? Dylan? Derek? I didn't care. He looked right at me and had the nerve to smirk. He was enjoying this, soaking up the humiliation he thought he was dishing out. Emily wrapped herself around him even tighter, making a show of it. But I didn't give them the reaction they wanted. I didn't scream. I didn't break down. Instead, something inside me snapped into place, and it wasn't anger. Not the wild kind anyway. It was something colder, sharper. I knew in that moment that I'd never look at her the same way again. This wasn't just a mistake, some stupid fling. No, this was deliberate. She wanted to hurt me, break me. And the worst part? She thought she'd won. Without a word, I turned on my heel and walked out the door. I could hear Emily laughing behind me, her voice echoing in my ears as I stepped outside. The sun was too bright, the world too normal for what had just happened, but I didn't stop. I got into my car, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. I drove. No destination in mind, just needing to move. The city blurred around me, but my mind was razor sharp, focused only on one thing: revenge. I wasn't going to cry about this. I wasn't going to lie awake at night, wondering where it went wrong. No, this wasn't about what I could have done differently. This was about what I was going to do next. As I drove, the plan started forming. Divorce? Sure, that would be the clean, logical move, right? But that wasn't enough. Not for what she did. Not for how she made me feel in that moment. Standing there like an idiot while she flaunted her betrayal. She had to pay for that. They both did. And I wasn't going to walk away quietly. By the time I got home, it was late. The house was dark, quiet. Emily was probably in bed by now, sleeping like nothing had happened. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes, my mind still racing, piecing everything together. Divorce would come, of course. But it wouldn't be quiet. It wouldn't be simple. I wasn't just going to let her walk away with a chunk of my business, half the house and whatever else she thought she was entitled to. No, this was going to be public, humiliating. just like what she'd done to me. I stepped into the house, the stench of their encounter still lingering in the air. For a brief second, I almost felt sick, but I pushed it down. I wasn't going to let this place become some symbol of betrayal. It was mine. Everything in here was mine. And I was going to take it back, piece by piece. The next morning, I left for work like nothing had happened. I needed to be smart about this. Rushing into a confrontation wouldn't work. Emily was cruel, calculated. She'd been planning this for a while, I could tell by the way she looked at me yesterday. She'd been waiting for that moment, waiting for me to catch her. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't the kind of man to crumble. I wasn't going to scream and shout. I was going to play the long game, and I was going to win. I bought a few hidden cameras, discreet ones with good resolution. It wasn't hard. A quick search online, and by the end of the day, I had what I needed. That night, after Emily went to bed, I carefully placed the cameras around the house, one in the living room, another in the bedroom. I wasn't sure if she'd bring her lover here again, but I needed proof, real proof. Not for me, I already knew what she was, but for the world. The next few days were a blur of routine. I pretended everything was fine, acted like the same hardworking guy she'd always known. I even stayed later at the office a couple of nights to give her space, to let her think I was too busy to notice. But every moment, my mind was on that footage. I checked the cameras obsessively, waiting for the moment they'd slip up. And they did. 3 days after I installed the cameras, I caught them. It was around 3 p.m. on a Wednesday. I was at my desk going over some paperwork when my phone buzzed. Motion detected. My heart raced as I pulled up the live feed. There they were, right in the living room again, like clockwork. She didn't even bother changing the sheets on the couch. I watched, my blood boiling but my mind clear. They thought they were safe, that they could get away with it right under my nose. But I had everything I needed now. Every disgusting detail recorded, every kiss, every touch. They didn't know it yet, but their little game was about to end. That night, I didn't say a word to her. She greeted me with the same fake smile she'd always used when she wanted to avoid a real conversation. I played along, acting tired, distracted. But inside, I was planning my next move. I had the evidence. Now it was time to use it. I didn't feel sad anymore. There was no room for that, only focus. Precision. Emily had shown her true colors, and now it was my turn. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of cold purpose. The plan was set. Now it was just a matter of time. As I sat at the breakfast table, Emily moved around the kitchen like nothing had changed. She didn't have a clue, still so confident in her little game, still smug. She wore the same smile she'd given me every morning for the past 15 years. But I knew what was behind it now. I'd seen the other side. I sipped my coffee and stared at her, calculating. She was still wrapped in her own world, probably thinking of her next rendezvous with the personal trainer, completely unaware that I was already pulling the strings. It wasn't just about catching her in the act anymore. It was about making sure this whole thing burned to the ground, with her standing in the ashes. By the time I left for work, my mind was already moving 3 steps ahead. The cameras had done their job, but it wasn't enough to just have evidence. I needed to piece together the entire picture. I needed to understand the timeline of her affair, figure out every move she'd made, and how long she'd been planning to humiliate me like that. So after a few hours at the office, I took a detour to the phone store during lunch. I'd been thinking about it since the moment I caught them on camera. I needed to get into her phone records. I wanted to know who she was texting, calling, all of it. The clerk didn't ask many questions. A few sweet words about needing extra phone tracking for my wife's safety, and I walked out with access to everything I needed. Once I had the app set up, I could see her calls, her texts, everything in real time. It was only a matter of hours before I'd start piecing things together. Back at the office, I logged into the camera feed again, out of sheer habit. I couldn't help it. I wanted to know if they were meeting up again, see how reckless they'd become. But no, nothing today. She was likely saving her fun for later. It didn't matter. I had plenty of time. After work, I made my way home with the same indifferent face, the same routine. Emily greeted me like always, still unaware. I wanted her to keep thinking she was getting away with it, that I hadn't noticed anything. It would make the fallout that much sweeter. Later that evening, after she went to bed, I stayed up, sitting in my office, going through the phone records. I could see the call logs now, the frequent texts. The number she texted most, I didn't even need to cross-reference to know it was him. They messaged each other constantly. The exchanges spread throughout the day, always ending in a smile from her, a laugh, like clockwork. As I scrolled through the logs, it all started to come together. She hadn't just started this affair recently. This had been going on 4 months, probably over a year. The more I dug, the more the lies unraveled. All the nights she stayed late at work, the weekends she had plans with friends. It was all there, laid out in her own digital footprint. I leaned back in my chair, fingers tapping the armrest as I processed it all. My anger simmered just below the surface, but I kept it in check. This was bigger than just some one-off fling. She'd planned it all, let it unfold while I was working my ass off to keep everything afloat. She had no idea how far I was willing to go now, but she would soon. Over the next week, I started putting everything together. The camera footage was key, of course, but it wasn't enough. I needed more than just video proof. I started pulling bank statements, tracking where our money was going. It didn't take long to find the charges, dinners, hotels, gifts. All the things she'd bought with my hard-earned money while she paraded around with her lover. It made me sick, but every new discovery just sharpened my resolve. While I was gathering the evidence, I kept the routine. I acted like everything was fine. I kept staying late at work, kept giving her the space to hang herself. The more comfortable she got, the more careless she became. A few times I even saw her texting him right in front of me, her phone lighting up with notifications. Each time she gave me that fake smile, the one that used to make me feel like everything was okay between us. Not anymore. But the worst part wasn't the texts or the calls, it was the way she started treating me around the house, as if I was nothing more than an obstacle. If I asked her about her day, she'd give me some half-hearted answer, barely making eye contact. If I suggested we do something together, she'd make an excuse, say she was tired or had something else to do. It was like she was daring me to confront her, daring me to notice. But I didn't, not yet. One night, about 2 weeks into the game, I was at my office again, reviewing everything when I decided to call an old friend. Sam was a divorce lawyer, and I'd done some business with him a few years back. He owed me a favor, and now it was time to cash in. I didn't give him the full details, not yet, but I told him enough. I told him about Emily, about the affair, and that I wanted to make sure when this ended, she walked away with nothing. Sam listened quietly, then asked, "You sure you want to play it like this?" "Absolutely," I said. "I'm done being the nice guy. She's not going to get away with this." He paused for a moment before agreeing to help me. We set a meeting for the following week to go over everything in detail. I could hear the concern in his voice, but I wasn't in the mood to explain myself. All I wanted was to make sure the paperwork was airtight when the time came. The next day I stayed late at the office, just like I'd been doing for weeks now. But this time I wasn't working. I was watching the live feed again, waiting for the next slip-up. And sure enough, around 4 p.m., she brought him back to the house. They didn't even wait long this time. They went straight to the bedroom, laughing like nothing else in the world mattered. I watched them for a while, my jaw tight, my fists clenched, but I didn't stop them. I needed them to keep thinking they were invincible, that no one was watching. They were digging their own grave, and I was handing them the shovel. When I got home that night, Emily was already in the kitchen, cleaning up from dinner. She barely glanced at me when I walked in, her usual routine of avoidance. I wondered if she'd even bother trying to act like she cared anymore. But I didn't let her see anything. I just kept my face neutral, my voice calm, while inside I was already planning my next move. Over the next few days, I started pulling back emotionally. She didn't notice. Of course she didn't. She was too wrapped up in her new life, thinking I was still the same clueless fool she'd been deceiving for months. But every cold look, every dismissive shrug she threw my way only fueled my resolve. This was going to be bigger than just some simple divorce. I scheduled another meeting with Sam to go over the details. This time I brought the evidence. I laid it all out in front of him. The bank statements, the camera footage, the texts. Sam was silent for a moment, flipping through the papers. When he looked up at me, I could see he was impressed. "You've really done your homework," he said. "I'm not leaving anything to chance," I replied. Sam nodded. "I'll get the paperwork ready. With what you've got here, she won't see a dime. But you've got to be careful. If she catches on before we're ready—" "She won't," I cut him off. "She's too arrogant to even think I know." Sam sighed but didn't argue. He knew better. This was going to happen on my terms, and when it did, Emily would have nothing left. As the weeks went on, I continued gathering every piece of information I could. The more I learned, the more everything started to fall into place. I mapped out her affair, figured out their routine, and learned their habits. It was almost like a twisted game of chess, and I was always 2 moves ahead. I knew when she'd be meeting him, where they'd go, and what they'd do. And I made sure to document every second of it. But despite all of this, there were moments when it still hit me. Late at night, lying in bed next to her, I'd catch myself wondering how it all went so wrong. How did we get here? How did the woman I once loved turn into this stranger lying beside me, texting another man while pretending to sleep? I'd feel that familiar pang of grief, but I'd push it away, reminding myself that this wasn't about love anymore. This was about control. This was about taking back everything she'd stolen from me: my dignity, my pride, my life. One night, as I sat in my office reviewing more footage, I found myself thinking back to the early days of our marriage. We'd been so happy then, hadn't we? It seemed like a lifetime ago now, a different world. I'd been naive, thinking that love was enough to keep everything together. But now I knew better. Love was nothing compared to betrayal, and in the end, it was betrayal that would fuel me to the very end. The day after that, I called Sam again. "It's time," I told him. "Get everything ready." He didn't ask questions. He just agreed and set up the final meeting to sign the papers. That night, I came home to find Emily on the phone, her voice soft, laughing at something I couldn't hear. I didn't need to hear it to know who she was talking to. As I walked past her, I glanced at her phone. The name on the screen was a fake one, of course, some alias they'd come up with to keep things secret. But I knew the truth. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and leaned against the counter, watching her. She didn't even notice me standing there. That was when I knew I'd won. It was all about timing now. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I opened my laptop and started reviewing everything one last time. The camera footage, the texts, the bank statements, it was all there, ready to be used. I didn't feel the anger anymore. It had turned into something colder, more calculated. I wasn't doing this out of rage. I was doing this because it was the right thing to do. Emily had made her choice, and now she was going to face the consequences. As I closed my laptop and got ready for bed, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it, the final stage. And when it was over, I'd finally be free. The moment everything fell into place, I knew I was ready. The proof was airtight: videos, texts, bank records, all of it lining up perfectly. I sat back in my office chair, the glow of the laptop reflecting off my face as I reviewed it one last time. The knots of anger that had been festering for weeks had settled into something sharper. There was no more rage, no more bitterness, only cold resolve. It was time for the first strike. I couldn't hold off any longer. The next morning, I made sure to leave the house early, just like every other day. I wanted everything to appear normal. The same routine, the same empty words exchanged at breakfast. Emily hardly looked at me as I left, barely registering my presence, and that was fine by me. It was easier this way. She wouldn't see it coming. I called Sam from the car and told him to prepare the papers. He confirmed everything was in place: the divorce filings, the asset freezes, everything to make sure Emily was left with nothing. The second she was served, it would all unravel. But first, I needed to drop the bomb on her social circle. I had set up an anonymous email account the night before. The subject line was simple. You deserve to know the truth. Attached were all the damning screenshots, the videos, everything that would destroy the perfect image she had carefully curated with her family and friends. Her parents, her best friends, her coworkers, they were all on the recipient list. The moment they opened those attachments, Emily's world would crumble, and I would be there to watch it happen. I hit send. There was no going back now. As I drove to the office, I kept checking my phone, waiting for the first wave of reactions. It didn't take long. A flood of messages, missed calls, and notifications filled my screen, all from Emily. Her parents must have called her right away, probably demanding to know what the hell was going on. But I didn't answer. I wasn't interested in her frantic explanations, her desperate attempts to control the damage. I had already won this battle. The rest of the day was a blur. I ignored her texts and calls as they piled up. By noon, she had probably realized I wasn't going to respond, but I didn't care. I wanted her to panic. I wanted her to sit with the weight of what she'd done as it spread like wildfire through her life. When I finally walked through the door that evening, she was waiting for me in the living room. The same place where it had all started, where I'd found her with him. But this time, she wasn't laughing. She wasn't smug. She looked panicked, on the edge of tears, her face pale and drawn. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to spin this in her favor. "Jake, what the hell is going on?" she started, her voice trembling. "What is this? Why is everyone calling me about those emails?" I didn't say anything at first, just stared at her, letting the silence stretch out. I wanted her to squirm, to feel the pressure building. "Jake, please, talk to me. I don't understand. Why would you do this?" I finally spoke, my voice low and even. "I know everything, Emily. The affair, the lies, all of it. I've known for weeks." Her face went white. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was frozen, caught. I didn't give her a chance to recover. "You thought you could humiliate me, make a fool of me. You thought I'd just sit back and take it, but I'm not that guy. I never was. I didn't mean," she stammered, her voice breaking. "Don't," I cut her off. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to justify any of it. You did this to yourself." She sank into the couch, her hands shaking as she pressed them to her face. I didn't feel anything watching her fall apart like that. There was no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just a cold, detached awareness that this was necessary. This was the price she had to pay. "You've already lost, Emily," I continued, my voice steady. "You lost the second you thought you could walk all over me." She started sobbing then, but I didn't stop. I wasn't done yet. "I've filed for divorce. You'll be served soon, probably by tomorrow. And just so you know, you're not getting anything, not a penny. I've frozen all the accounts, the house, the business, everything. It's all mine. You're walking away with nothing." Her sobs turned into gasps, panic rising in her chest. She looked up at me, eyes wide and pleading. "Please, Jake, we can fix this. I made a mistake. We can work through it. Don't do this." I almost laughed at that. The desperation in her voice, the way she was scrambling to hold on to something, anything, it was pathetic. "There's no fixing this," I said coldly. "You burned everything down the moment you brought him into our house." She reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I stepped back, out of her reach. "You're going to meet him this weekend, aren't you?" I asked, my voice calm. Emily looked confused for a second, still trying to process what was happening. What? What do you mean?" I didn't even blink. "You and him, you're planning to go away this weekend, right? A little getaway while you think I'm too busy working to notice." Her eyes widened. I could see the truth in her face before she even spoke. "How did you know?" I shrugged. "I know everything, Emily. That's what you never understood. I've been 10 steps ahead of you this whole time." She collapsed into herself, a broken shell of the woman who had once laughed in my face, thinking she'd beaten me. I didn't give her a second glance as I walked out of the living room, leaving her sobbing on the couch. Upstairs, I grabbed my phone and called Sam. "It's done," I told him. "She knows. Serve her the papers tomorrow." He didn't ask for details. He knew this was coming. The next morning, Emily was gone by the time I woke up. Her side of the bed was cold, untouched, and the house was eerily quiet. I figured she must have gone to meet him early, probably hoping to escape the fallout that was closing in on her. She had no idea what was waiting for her. I called Sam to make sure the divorce papers were being served at her parents' house later that day. That way, her entire family would be there to witness it. More humiliation to add to the pile. Then I made one more call. The hotel where they were staying, I'd timed everything perfectly. The documents would hit her at the same time she was checking into their weekend getaway. She'd be cornered, trapped between the man she thought she loved and the reality she was about to face. I left work early that day, driving to the hotel myself. I wanted to see it unfold. I parked a block away and waited, watching the entrance from my car. Around 5 p.m. I saw them. Emily and her lover walking into the lobby together, looking carefree and completely oblivious. I could see the bags in their hands, their smiles like none of this was about to blow up in their faces. I waited until they were seated in the hotel restaurant. It was a quiet, upscale place full of couples, families, exactly the kind of setting where you didn't expect a scene. But that was the point. I wanted witnesses. I walked in, calm and collected, carrying a small folder. The maitre d' barely glanced at me as I made my way to their table. When I reached them, Emily's smile froze on her face. Her lover looked confused, probably not recognizing me right away. "Hello, Emily," I said, my voice steady. Her eyes widened in horror as she finally registered what was happening. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. I pulled out the folder, dropping it on the table in front of them. "This is everything," I said, keeping my tone level. "The texts, the emails, the videos, it's all there." Her lover, the smug bastard who had sat in my living room with her, reached for the folder, flipping it open. His face drained of color as he started scanning the contents, the truth sinking in. Emily's hands shook as she reached for the folder, but I didn't wait for her to go through it. I'd already said what I needed to say. "I'll let you two figure out the rest," I said, turning to leave. As I walked out of the restaurant, I could feel the eyes of the other diners on me, whispering, confused, curious. But I didn't care. This wasn't about them. This was about Emily. By the time I made it back to my car, my phone buzzed. It was Sam, letting me know the divorce papers had been served. Emily would come home to find nothing waiting for her. No house, no money, nothing. I sat back in the driver's seat and let out a long breath. It was over. I had won. And the best part? I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction. Just a quiet, calm sense of closure. Emily had made her choice. Now she was going to live with the consequences. After the public confrontation at the restaurant, I knew the ball was in motion. I drove home in silence, feeling the weight of what had just happened sink in. It wasn't relief exactly, more like a sense of finality. The moment I'd been waiting for had come, and now there was nothing left to do but watch it all unfold. When I got home, the house was dark. I didn't bother turning on the lights as I walked through the familiar rooms. This place had once felt like home. Now it was just a shell. I had no attachment to it anymore. It was just another piece of the life I was about to leave behind. The next morning, Sam called with an update. The divorce papers had been officially served, and Emily's assets were frozen. There was no way for her to touch the money, the house, or the business. It was all locked up, just as I had planned. Sam assured me everything was airtight. She wouldn't be able to worm her way out of it. "Thanks, Sam," I said, my voice calm. "Let me know if she tries anything." "I will," he replied. "But Jake, are you sure this is how you want to handle things? I mean, it's pretty brutal." I paused, considering his words. "I'm sure," I said, my tone final. "She deserves everything that's coming to her." Sam didn't argue. He knew better by now. I hung up and put the phone down, staring out the window for a long moment. I knew Emily would be coming home soon, and I wanted to be ready. A few hours later, I heard the front door creak open. Her footsteps were soft, tentative. as if she was testing the air. I could tell she wasn't sure what to expect when she saw me. I sat in the living room waiting, knowing she would come to me eventually. She appeared in the doorway, her face pale, eyes red from crying. She stood there clutching her purse like it was a lifeline, her whole body trembling. I didn't say anything, just waited for her to speak. "Jake?" Her voice cracked. She was barely holding it together. "I got the papers." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice broken. I I know I messed up, but we can work it out, can't we? Please, Jake, don't do this." I looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in months. She wasn't the same person I had married. The woman standing in front of me was a stranger, someone who had made choices that shattered everything we had built together. And now she was scrambling to save what little she had left. "We're past that," I said, my voice cold. "You made your bed, Emily. Now you have to lie in it." She sobbed, her body shaking as she crumpled to the floor. I didn't move. There was nothing left to say. She had chosen this path, and I wasn't going to bail her out of the mess she had created. "Please, Jake," she begged, her words barely audible through her tears. "I don't know what to do. I have nothing left." "That's not my problem anymore," I said, standing up. "You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy everything." I walked past her, not bothering to look back. I couldn't afford to feel anything for her anymore. This was the price she had to pay, and I wasn't about to soften the blow. Over the next few days, Emily's desperation only grew. She called me constantly, leaving voicemail after voicemail, pleading for a second chance. I didn't answer. Every message she left was just another reminder of how far she had fallen. Her confidence, the arrogance that had been there the night I caught her, was completely gone. Now she was just a shadow of the woman she used to be, clinging to the wreckage of her life. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not even for a second. I had spent too long being the fool, too long letting her walk all over me. This was my time to take control, to finally reclaim my dignity. One evening, about a week after the papers were served, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Emily standing there, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was a mess, her eyes hollow, and her clothes wrinkled and disheveled. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't move, didn't invite her in. I just stood there, watching her crumble in front of me. It was a strange feeling seeing her like this. A part of me thought I would feel triumphant, that I would savor the moment of her downfall. But all I felt was a quiet sense of justice. "You can't stay here," I said flatly. "You know that." Her lip trembled, and she bit down hard, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill over. "Please, Jake." "I don't have anyone else." I shook my head. "You should have thought of that before you started this." She took a shaky breath, her eyes searching mine for any hint of forgiveness, any sign that I might relent. But there was nothing left between us. Whatever bond we had shared was long gone, burned to ashes by her betrayal. "Goodbye, Emily," I said, stepping back and closing the door in her face. I stood there for a long moment after the door clicked shut, listening to her muffled sobs on the other side. But I didn't open it again. I couldn't. This was the end of us, and it had to be. The next few days passed in a blur. I threw myself into work, trying to keep my mind off the chaos that Emily had brought into my life. But no matter how hard I tried, there was always this lingering sense of unfinished business. I had ruined her life, yes, but there was something about it that still felt incomplete. And then I found out about the personal trainer. It was late one night when Sam called me. "Jake, you need to hear this," he said, his voice serious. "What's going on?" "It's about Emily's lover, the guy she was seeing." I tensed, waiting for whatever bombshell Sam was about to drop. "He's been using her, Jake. Turns out he's a con artist. He's been milking her for money and connections, and now that she's got nothing, he's cutting her loose." I let out a low breath, not surprised, but still feeling a twinge of something. Maybe satisfaction, maybe pity. "There's more," Sam continued. He's in deep trouble with the law. Apparently, he's been involved in some shady business deals, and now the authorities are after him. He's going down, Jake, and Emily's going down with him. I sat there, absorbing the information. I didn't know whether to laugh or feel sorry for her. This guy, the one she had thrown everything away for, was a scammer, and now she was going to be caught in the fallout. Sam's voice cut through my thoughts. What do you want to do about it? I leaned back in my chair, thinking. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. I had set everything in motion, and now it was time for the last blow. Let it play out, I said finally. She made her choice. I hung up the phone and stared out the window, feeling the weight of it all settle over me. Emily had destroyed our life together for a man who had been using her the whole time. Now she was going to lose everything, her reputation, her freedom, maybe even her dignity. But I didn't feel sorry for her. This was the bed she had made, and now she was going to lie in it. A few days later, I got another call from Sam. Jake, it's over, he said. The authorities caught up with Emily's lover. He's been arrested, and Emily's involved. It's all over the news. I pulled up my phone, scrolling through the headlines. There it was, splashed across every news site. Personal trainer arrested in embezzlement scandal. Wife of local business owner involved. I couldn't help the small smile that crept onto my face. It was done. Emily's life was officially in ruins, and there was no coming back from this. As I sat there looking at the headlines, I realized something. Revenge wasn't about the satisfaction of watching someone fall. It wasn't about the moment of victory. It was about reclaiming power, about taking back control of my life. Emily had taken so much from me, but now I had taken everything from her. And in doing so, I had finally freed myself from the chains of her betrayal. I stood up, walked to the front door, and stepped outside into the crisp evening air. The house was quiet, peaceful, almost like it was waiting for something new. And maybe it was. Maybe I was. I had won. But it wasn't the victory I had expected. It was quieter, deeper. It was the knowledge that I had taken back control of my life, that I wasn't the fool anymore. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few months lift from my shoulders. Emily's choices had destroyed her, but they had freed me, and now I was ready to start over. I thought I had seen it all, that there was nothing more Emily could do to surprise me. I'd ruined her world, taken back everything she'd stolen from me. She was already a ghost in my life, wandering through the wreckage she'd created. I'd taken pleasure in watching her lover fall, dragging her down with him. Everything was falling into place exactly as I planned, but then she came back, knocking on my door again. It had been a few weeks since the public humiliation at the hotel, and I figured she'd moved on, maybe crawling into some dark corner of the mess she'd made. I was wrong. When I opened the door, Emily stood there looking even more broken than the last time. But this time, there was something different in her eyes. She wasn't here to plead for forgiveness or beg for mercy. No, it was worse than that. It was desperation. The kind of desperation that drives people to do things they can't take back. She stood there for a moment, not saying anything. Her hair was a tangled mess, her clothes rumpled like she hadn't bothered changing in days. She looked like she was barely holding on, like she had nothing left to lose. I need to talk to you, Shalom, she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. I didn't move, didn't invite her in. You don't have anything to say that I want to hear. Jake, please, she begged, her voice cracking. Just hear me out. I stared at her for a moment, debating whether to slam the door in her face, but something in her tone made me pause. There was no fight left in her, just defeat. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside, letting her into the house she used to call home, but now it felt like mine alone. She walked in slowly, glancing around as if she was seeing it for the first time in years, like everything had changed in her absence. She sank down onto the couch, her hands trembling as she clasped them in her lap. I stayed standing, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. What do you want, Emily? I asked, my voice cold. She let out a shaky breath, struggling to find the words. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I know I ruined everything, but I'm in trouble, Jake. Real trouble. I didn't say anything, just watched her as she unraveled in front of me. She glanced up at me, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. It's him, the personal trainer, the one you exposed. He's turned on me, Jake. He's blaming everything on me, saying I helped him, that I knew about the scams. I didn't. I swear I didn't know what he was doing. I almost laughed. The audacity of it all. You expect me to believe that? I asked, my voice filled with disbelief. You lied to me for months. Why should I believe a word you say now? She flinched at my words, but I didn't feel sorry. She deserved worse. I'm telling the truth, she insisted, her voice desperate. He's trying to drag me down with him. The police have been questioning me, asking about the money, about everything we did together. I swear, Jake, I didn't know. I was just caught up in it, in him. She started to cry then, her body shaking as she buried her face in her hands. I watched her crumble, but I didn't move to comfort her. There was nothing left between us that warranted compassion. So what? I asked, keeping my voice steady. You expect me to help you? You think I'm just going to step in and save you after everything you've done? She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I have no one else, Jake. You know that. Everyone's abandoned me. My family, my friends. I'm all alone. Please, I'm begging you. I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. You brought this on yourself, Emily. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. She stood up then, her face twisting in anger. I know I messed up, Jake. I know I made mistakes, but I didn't deserve all of this. I didn't deserve to have my life destroyed. I straightened up, stepping closer to her, the anger I had buried for so long finally bubbling to the surface. You didn't deserve it? You think you're the victim here? You're the one who betrayed me, who tore this life apart. Don't stand here and act like you're innocent. She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. You made me feel like nothing, Emily, like I was disposable. And now you're standing here, asking for help? You're lucky I haven't done worse. She flinched, stepping back as if my words had physically hit her. She knew I was right. She couldn't argue with that. For a moment, the room was silent, the tension thick between us. Then she let out a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I don't know what to do, she whispered, her voice small. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix this, I said, my voice hard. It's done. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the floor, as if she was searching for a way out, some way to change what was already set in motion. But there was no escape, not for her. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with a sadness I hadn't seen in a long time. I don't expect you to forgive me, Jake. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for everything. I stared at her, feeling nothing. Not anger, not pity, just nothing. She could say all the right words, but they didn't matter anymore. Goodbye, Emily, I said, my voice final. She hesitated for a moment, as if she wanted to say more, but then she turned and walked out the door, closing it softly behind her. I stood there, staring at the closed door, wondering if this was it, the final chapter. The end of everything we had once been. I didn't feel victorious, but I didn't feel regret either. It was just over. Later that night, as I sat in the quiet of the house, I thought about everything that had happened. The affair, the lies, the revenge. It all felt so far away now. Like it had happened to someone else in another life. I had spent so much time plotting, so much energy on making sure she paid for what she did. And now that it was over, I wasn't sure what was left. I wasn't the same person anymore. I didn't know if I ever could be. But one thing was certain. I was free, free of her lies, free of the betrayal that had consumed me for so long. And that was enough. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes and letting out a long breath. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could face it, and that was all I needed. I stood in the quiet of the house, feeling the emptiness settle around me. The door had closed behind Emily for the last time, and for a moment, the weight of everything hit me. It wasn't sadness or anger anymore. It was something colder, something that resembled peace. I'd gotten my revenge, I'd made her pay for what she'd done, and now she was out of my life. For months, I had planned every move, controlled every piece of the puzzle. I had watched as her world fell apart, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the person she used to be. She had become a hollow version of herself, and I was the one who had orchestrated it. But standing there in the quiet of the house, I realized something. It wasn't just her that had changed. I wasn't the same man I used to be. I walked through the empty living room, past the couch where I had once found her laughing with him. The anger I felt that day had fueled everything that came after. It had pushed me to destroy her, to reclaim what was mine. But now, with it all behind me, I didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected. I felt nothing. Just the slow realization that the person I had been, the man who had loved her, who had built a life with her, was gone too. I had changed, and there was no going back. I found myself in the kitchen, staring out the window at the backyard where we used to spend time together. It felt like a lifetime ago. I wondered if she felt the same, if she looked back and saw the same emptiness that I did. But it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't doing this for her. I wasn't thinking about her anymore. This was about me. I thought back to the moment I'd caught her, right here in this house, in the living room that used to be ours. I'd walked in and everything had shattered. But I hadn't broken down. I hadn't let her see me fall apart. Instead, I'd taken control. I'd refused to be the victim, refused to let her win. And now, standing here, I realize that's what all of this had been about. It wasn't just revenge. It was about taking back control of my life. I walked over to the table where my phone was sitting. I hadn't looked at it since Emily had left, but now I picked it up and scrolled through the messages. Nothing new, just the silence of a life that was no longer tied to hers. It felt strange, like I was waiting for something that wasn't going to happen. And then, just as I was about to put the phone down, a message popped up on the screen. It was from Sam. "Jake, I just heard Emily's lover got arrested. Embezzlement. She's involved." I stared at the message, feeling the weight of it settle over me. I'd known this was coming. Sam had warned me. The trainer, her lover, had been using her from the beginning. Now it was all coming back to bite them both. I pulled up the news on my phone, scrolling through the headlines until I found it. There it was. Local trainer arrested in major embezzlement scandal. Woman involved. They didn't name her, but I knew who they were talking about. Emily was caught up in it, just like Sam had said. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the screen, reading the article. She had thrown everything away for this guy. She had betrayed me, destroyed our life, and now she was paying the price. I should have felt something, anger, satisfaction, maybe even pity. But all I felt was a quiet sense of closure. This was it, the final chapter. Emily was stuck in a mess she couldn't get out of. The man she'd chosen over me was going to prison, and she was caught in the fallout. And the best part? I wasn't involved anymore. I was free of it, free of her. I set the phone down and looked around the kitchen. The house was still mine, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It was just a place, four walls filled with memories I didn't want to hold on to. The next step was clear. It was time to move on. I made the decision right then. I was going to sell the house. There was nothing left for me here. I'd built a life with Emily, and that life was gone now. It was time to start over. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I contacted a real estate agent, started packing up the few things I wanted to keep. Most of it, I realized, didn't matter to me anymore. The photos, the furniture, the little pieces of our life together, they all felt like they belonged to someone else, someone I didn't recognize anymore. As I packed, I thought about what came next. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. But that was okay. I didn't need a plan. I just needed to be free. I spent one last night in the house, sitting in the empty living room, surrounded by boxes. The quiet felt different now. It wasn't suffocating like it used to be. It was peaceful. I knew that when I walked out of this house the next morning, I wasn't coming back, and I was okay with that. The following morning, I stood in the doorway looking at the house one last time. It didn't hurt to leave. It didn't feel like I was losing anything. It felt like I was finally closing a door that had been left open for too long. As I walked out, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw another message from Sam. "Emily's been arrested too. It's over, Jake." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I just smiled, slipping the phone back into my pocket and walking to my car. It was over. All of it. As I drove away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The house, the memories, the betrayal, they were all behind me now. And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The road stretched out in front of me, open and empty, like the future that was waiting for me. I didn't know where I was going, but it didn't matter. I was free, and that was all I needed. Later that day, as I sat in a quiet diner on the outskirts of town, I thought about what Sam had said. Emily had been arrested. Her lover was gone, and now she was caught in the mess she had helped create. I thought about her standing in that doorway, begging for help, and I realized something. Revenge wasn't about seeing her suffer. It wasn't about watching her life fall apart. It wasn't even about winning. It was about reclaiming my own life. Taking back the control I had lost the day I walked into that living room and saw her with him. I had done that. I had taken back my power, my dignity, and my sense of self. And now, with her out of my life, I could move on. I could start over. I finished my coffee and paid the bill, walking back out into the sunlight. The day felt different, brighter somehow. Maybe it was just the weight that had been lifted off my shoulders. Or maybe it was the simple fact that I was finally free. As I got into my car and then started driving again, I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't looking back. I was only looking forward. And that was enough.